You think you're rational. You think you weigh evidence, consider both sides, and arrive at logical conclusions. You don't. Your brain is a rigged courtroom where the verdict was decided before the trial even started, and every piece of evidence gets filtered through a system designed to prove you right. So today, we're breaking down every major cognitive bias that's quietly destroying your decision-making, starting with the one that's probably affecting you right now. Confirmation bias. Here's the thing about confirmation bias. It's not just that you prefer information that agrees with you. It's that your entire brain, from how you search for evidence to how you interpret it to how you remember it later, is built to make you feel correct. Every step of the process is compromised. And the worst part? Knowing this doesn't fix it. The very mechanism you'd use to check for this bias is the one being hijacked. Let me explain how deep this goes. In 1960, Peter Wason ran a deceptively simple experiment. He gave participants the sequence 2, 4, 6, and asked them to figure out the rule by proposing their own sequences. The actual rule was just any ascending numbers, but participants overwhelmingly guessed something specific like numbers increasing by 2, and then only tested sequences that confirmed their guess. 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. They kept asking questions designed to get yes answers rather than ones that could prove them wrong. Nobody tried 1, 3, 47. That would have been too scary. But here's where it gets worse. You also apply completely different standards depending on whether evidence agrees with you. A Stanford study handed identical research data to people on both sides of the capital punishment debate. Same numbers, same methodology. Both groups walked away more convinced of their original position. Same data. Two completely different realities. Your memory does this too. People remember information that fits their existing beliefs far better than anything that contradicts them. So over time, your beliefs don't just stay the same. They get stronger. Every confirming detail gets filed away neatly, while contradictory evidence just sort of evaporates, which is, not ideal. This is exactly why political polarization gets worse when people hear the other side's arguments. Each side runs the same evidence through their own filter and comes out more certain than before. Your brain isn't broken. It's working exactly as designed. The design just happens to be terrible for finding truth, but if confirmation bias controls what evidence you pay attention to, the next one controls which evidence your brain even bothers to retrieve. And that one might be even sneakier. Quick test. Think of as many words as you can that start with the letter K. Now think of words where K is the third letter. Which list felt longer? If you're like most people, you said the first one. And you'd be wrong. There are roughly twice as many words with K as their third letter. But your brain doesn't organize words by their third letter, so those words are harder to retrieve. And because they're harder to retrieve, your brain assumes there are fewer of them. That's the availability heuristic in a nutshell. Coined by Tversky and Kahneman in 1973, it's the mental shortcut where you judge how likely something is based on how easily examples come to mind. If you can think of it quickly, your brain decides it must be common. If you can't think of it, it must be rare, simple, elegant, and completely unreliable. Here's where media exposure turns this from a quirky brain glitch into a genuine problem. You've seen plane crashes on the news, you've seen shark attacks, you've seen kidnappings. These events get burned into your memory because they're dramatic, emotional, and covered relentlessly. So when someone asks you how dangerous flying is, your brain pulls up every crash it's ever seen on a screen and goes, yeah, pretty dangerous. In reality, air passengers in 2023 experience an injury rate of 0.004 per 100 million miles traveled. Car and truck passengers, 42.2. You are literally over 10,000 times more likely to get hurt in a car. But nobody runs a 48-hour news cycle every time someone rear-ends a minivan at a Wendy's drive-thru. But here's the part nobody talks about. The availability heuristic has an evil twin called unavailability bias, and it might be worse. This is where your brain treats the absence of information as proof that something doesn't exist. Physicians misdiagnose rare conditions all the time, not because those conditions are unlikely, but because they haven't encountered them recently. The disease isn't unavailable in the world, it's unavailable in the doctor's memory. And if it's not in memory, it doesn't make the short list. Now multiply this by the modern internet. What you see isn't determined by what's true or what's statistically significant. It's determined by algorithms optimizing for engagement, repetition, and social reinforcement. The things that go viral aren't the things that are accurate, they're the things that are shareable, which means the already fragile connection between easy to recall and actually likely has essentially collapsed. Your brain is running a probability calculator on curated garbage, and if you think the availability heuristic distorts what you remember, wait until you see what happens when your brain latches onto the first number it it encounters. Anchoring bias. Here's a fun experiment. Spin a wheel of fortune in front of someone, let it land on a random number, and then ask them to estimate what percentage of African countries are in the United Nations. You'd think the wheel would be completely irrelevant. Turns out, no. In 1974, Tversky and Kahneman did exactly this. The wheel was rigged to land on either 10 or 65. People who saw 10 estimated about 25% of African countries were in the UN. People who saw 65 estimated 45%. That's a 20 percentage point gap produced entirely by a rigged wheel that had nothing to do with the question. They even offered financial rewards for accuracy. Didn't matter. You could literally pay them to think harder, and their brains just shrugged and said, nah, I'm going with the wheel. This is anchoring bias. Whatever number you see first becomes your reference point, and your brain refuses to move far enough away from it, even when that number is completely meaningless. But here's where it gets dark, because retailers figured this out a long time ago. People are 50 to 100% more likely to buy a product priced at 39 euros and 99 cents than one priced at 40 euros. Same product, 1 cent difference. But your brain sees a 3 instead of a 4, and suddenly it feels like a deal. Researchers at Ohio State took this further. They raised both a small coffee from 95 cents to $1 and a large coffee from $1.20 to $1.25. Same 5-cent increase on both. But large coffee sales jumped from 29% to 56% of all purchases because the small coffee crossed the dollar threshold and suddenly felt expensive by comparison. 5 cents rewired how people valued everything on the menu. It works with quantity too. Wansink, Kent, and Hoke ran an experiment with Campbell's soup. They put up a sign that said limit of 12 cans per family. Average purchases more than doubled, jumping from 3.3 cans to 7 cans per shopper. Nobody needed 7 cans of soup, but the number 12 was sitting there in their brain going, well, 7 is pretty reasonable compared to 12. The limit itself became the anchor, and before you think this is just a consumer problem, professional macroeconomic forecasters fall for it too. A 2007 study found that a significant portion of their forecast errors came from anchoring to the most recent available data, pulling predictions toward recent values instead of objective, long-term trends. These are people whose entire job is predicting numbers accurately, and they still can't escape the last number they looked at, which is, not ideal. If you think overestimating your own abilities sounds unlikely, wait until you hear about the bias that practically guarantees it. The Dunning-Kruger effect. This is the most internet-famous cognitive bias in existence, and half the people who reference it online are proving it in real time. Here's the setup. In 1999, psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger ran a series of studies on humor, grammar, and logic. They tested participants, then asked those participants to estimate how well they did. The results were honestly a little heartbreaking. People who scored in the bottom quartile, landing around the 12th percentile, estimated themselves at the 62nd percentile. That's a 50-point gap between where they thought they were and where they actually were. Not a small miscalculation. These people believed they were comfortably above average while performing worse than 88% of the room. But here's where it gets genuinely interesting. The reason low performers can't see the gap isn't stubbornness. It's structural. The skills you need to be good at something are the exact same skills you need to recognize whether you're good at it. Think about that for a second. To know that your grammar is bad, you need to understand grammar. To know your logic is flawed, you need to understand logic. Incompetence doesn't just make you bad at the task, it makes you blind to the fact that you're bad at the task. You can't see what you can't see because the thing you can't see is the thing that would let you see it, which is, not ideal. The paradox gets even better. When researchers actually trained participants and improved their skills, something clicked. Their self-assessment accuracy improved at the same time. The cure for overconfidence wasn't humility lectures or motivational posters, it was just learning the thing. Genuine competence builds the exact metacognitive machinery needed to recognize your own limitations. Now, before you go weaponizing this in every internet argument, there's a twist. Recent statistical analyses have challenged the entire effect, arguing that the classic Dunning-Kruger pattern might partly be a statistical artifact. Regression to the mean and boundary constraints in scoring can reproduce the exact same graph without requiring any psychological explanation at all. Studies on creative thinking and intelligence found that classical analyses supported the effect, but more advanced statistical methods didn't consistently back it up. And the original findings appear to generalize mostly to young, highly educated populations. So the most famous bias on the internet might be partly a math problem dressed up as a psychology finding. I don't know what to tell you. The science isn't settled. The core insight about metacognitive blindness still resonates, but the clean, dramatic graph everyone shares on social media, that's shakier than people think. And the irony of confidently citing the Dunning-Kruger effect without understanding the statistical debate around it is almost too perfect. But if you think overestimating your own abilities is bad, wait until you hear about the bias that makes you keep throwing money into things you should have abandoned years ago. Sunk cost fallacy. You have, at some point in your life, sat through a terrible movie because you already paid for the ticket. You knew it was bad. You knew leaving would give you 2 hours back. And you stayed anyway because your brain decided that $12 somehow obligated you to suffer. That's the sunk cost fallacy, and it's one of the most universally destructive biases in human decision making. Here's the thing. In economics, a sunk cost is any cost that's already been incurred and can't be recovered. Your money is gone. Your time is gone. And because those resources are gone forever, they are logically irrelevant to what you should do next. The only rational question is, what's my best option going forward? But humans almost never ask that. Instead, we ask, what will my investment mean if I quit now? Which is, not the same thing at all. Hal Arkus and Catherine Bloomer proved this beautifully with a theater ticket experiment. They sold season tickets at 3 different prices: full price at $15, a discount at $7, and a heavy discount at $2. Same shows, same seats, same experience. The people who paid full price attended significantly more plays, not because they enjoyed theater more, purely because they spent more money, and their brains refused to let that money go to waste. But here's where it gets genuinely humiliating. The attendance difference was strongest in the first half of the season, then faded as the psychological sting of payment wore off. People's behavior changed not because the shows got worse, but because their brains slowly forgot how much they'd paid. The logic was never really logic. It was emotional accounting with a shelf life, and before you comfort yourself by saying, well, that's a uniquely human stupidity, it's not. Research shows that both rats and humans demonstrate sensitivity to sunk costs after committing to pursue a reward. Rats, the animals we use as a baseline for basic cognition, are making the same mistake. The one silver lining is that cognitive reflection can reduce the effect, so we have the theoretical ability to override it, theoretically. The most spectacular example has its own name: the Concorde fallacy. The British and French governments poured billions into developing the Concorde supersonic jet long after the economic rationale was completely dead. But they'd already spent so much that the money already wasted became the primary justification for spending more. We can't stop now. We've invested too much. That's not strategy. That's the definition of throwing good money after bad. And 2 entire governments did it for decades. But if the sunk cost fallacy shows how past investments warp your decisions, wait until you see how the exact same information can make you choose completely differently depending on how someone words it. Framing. Effect. Your preferences aren't yours. They belong to whoever wrote the question. That sounds dramatic, but I can prove it. It's called the Asian disease problem, and it breaks your brain in the cleanest way possible. Participants were told a disease was expected to kill 600 people. They got 2 treatment options. In the first group, options were framed around lives saved. Option A saves 200 people. Option B has a 1/3 chance of saving all 600 and a 2/3 chance of saving nobody. Most people picked the safe bet. Save the 200, done, let's go home. But here's where it gets weird. A second group got the exact same problem with the exact same math, just worded differently. This time, options were framed around deaths. Option A means 400 people die. Option B has a 1/3 chance nobody dies and a 2/3 chance all 600 die. Suddenly, people flipped. They went with the gamble. Same numbers, same outcomes, completely opposite choices, which is, not ideal when we're talking about human lives. This is the framing effect, and it comes in 3 flavors. Risky choice framing, like the disease problem, where gain language versus loss language reverses risk preferences entirely. Attribute framing, where describing beef as 95% lean makes people rate it more favorably than 5% fat beef, even though those are literally the same cow. And goal framing, where telling someone you'll lose benefits if you don't comply works better than you'll gain benefits if you do comply. All 3 exploit the same underlying mechanism. That mechanism is loss aversion. Losses feel roughly twice as painful as equivalent gains feel good. So when something is framed as a gain, you get conservative. You protect what you have. When it's framed as a loss, you get reckless. You gamble to avoid the pain. Same math, different emotional weight, different decision. This isn't just a lab curiosity. Describing a drug as helping 70 patients get better versus 30 patients didn't get better shifts how both doctors and patients evaluate the treatment. Your doctor's word choice is literally altering your medical decisions, and it gets worse under pressure. Shorter deadlines push people toward riskier choices, suggesting that when you don't have time to think carefully, framing effects hit even harder. Familiarity amplifies it too. When researchers swapped the abstract Asian disease for COVID-19, risk-seeking behavior increased. Familiarity doesn't protect you, it makes you more vulnerable. So the next time someone presents you with a choice, remember, the answer you give might have nothing to do with what you actually want. It has everything to do with how the question was asked. But if you think a well-worded question can hijack your decision-making, wait until you see what something as simple as a shared label can do to your entire worldview. In-group bias. Up until now, every bias we've covered has been your brain lying to you about information, numbers, or your own abilities. This one's different. This is your brain lying to you about other people. And it starts the second you're placed into a group, any group, for any reason, no matter how meaningless. In-group bias is the tendency to give preferential treatment to people in your own group. That sounds obvious. Of course, you'd favor your friends, your family, your culture. There are shared experiences there. You could almost justify it, but the bias doesn't need any of that. It doesn't need shared history, shared culture, or even a real reason to exist. In the early 1970s, Henri Teichfel wanted to find the absolute minimum conditions required to trigger discrimination between groups. He took complete strangers, divided them based on literally nothing meaningful, things like a coin flip or which painter they preferred, and gave them a simple task. Distribute money to anonymous participants identified only by a code number and a group label. No faces, no names, no interaction, and people consistently gave more money to their own group. These groups had zero shared identity, zero history, zero reason to exist, and the label was enough. But that's not even the disturbing part. Participants didn't just favor their group. They would actively choose options that gave their own group less money if those options simultaneously gave the other group even less. People would sacrifice their own group's total benefit just to maintain a gap. They didn't want to win. They wanted the other group to lose more. That's not cooperation. That's not even selfishness. That's spite baked into the architecture of social cognition. Two theories try to explain why. Realistic conflict theory says it's about competition over limited resources, things like jobs, land, money. When there's not enough to go around, favoring your group is strategic. But social identity theory argues the bias is purely psychological. People favor their group because it makes them feel better about themselves. Positive group comparison equals positive self-image. Teichfel's studies support this second theory pretty decisively because there was nothing real to compete over. The bias also rewires your memory. When someone in your group does something good, that's because your group is just like that. When someone in your group does something bad, that's just one person having a rough day. For the outgroup, exact opposite. Their good behavior is a fluke. Their bad behavior is who they really are. But here's a twist nobody expects: the black sheep effect. If someone in your group is genuinely unlikable, you don't just dislike them the normal amount. You hate them more than you'd hate the exact same person if they belong to the other group. People punish their own bad apples harder to protect the group's image, which is, not ideal. So your brain picks a team based on nothing, rewrites your memory to make that team look good, and will literally hurt itself to hurt the other team more. But if you think the way we judge groups is bad, wait until you hear how we judge individuals, because the fundamental attribution error might be the most dangerous bias on this entire list. Fundamental attribution error, this is the one that'll follow you home. The fundamental attribution error is the tendency to attribute other people's behavior to their character while attributing your own behavior to circumstances. When you're late, it's because of traffic. When they're late, it's because they're irresponsible. When you bomb a presentation, it's because you were sick. When they bomb a presentation, it's because they're not cut out for the job. Same outcome, completely different explanation, and the only variable that changed is whether it happened to you or someone else. This isn't just a vague psychological concept. It was demonstrated perfectly in 1977 at Stanford. Researchers randomly assigned students into questioners and contestants. The questioners got to write their own trivia questions. The contestants had to answer them. If I get to write the questions, I'm pulling from whatever obscure nonsense I happen to know. That's not intelligence, that's a rigged game. But here's where it gets uncomfortable. Both the observers and the contestants themselves consistently rated the questioners as significantly more knowledgeable. The contestants, who were literally experiencing the unfairness firsthand, who knew the game was rigged, still thought, wow, that person is really smart. They couldn't override the bias even while living inside it, which is, not ideal. The reason this happens is almost stupidly simple. The person is right there in front of you doing the thing, they capture your attention, they appear to be the cause of their own behavior, the invisible circumstances surrounding them, the resources they lack, the systems they're operating within. None of that is as visible as the person themselves. So your brain takes a shortcut. They're just like that. And before you think this is some universal brain glitch hardwired into every human equally, it's not. Individualist cultures show significantly stronger fundamental attribution error. Collectivist cultures weigh situational factors much more heavily. So this bias isn't just a neurological inevitability. Your society is actively training you to make this mistake. Now let's talk about where this actually hurts people. Managers assume underperforming employees are lazy rather than under-resourced. Physicians see a patient not following their treatment plan and chalk it up to a lack of motivation rather than considering that maybe the patient can't afford the medication. Over time, these attributions compound. People in favorable circumstances get credited for their character. People facing structural barriers get blamed for theirs. That's not a trivia fact. That's the invisible architecture shaping whose lives get better and whose get worse every single day. And honestly, that's what all 8 of these biases are. They're not interesting psychology tidbits you forget by tomorrow. They're the operating system running underneath every judgment you make, every person you evaluate, every decision you think you arrived at rationally. Confirmation bias filters what you see. The availability heuristic distorts what you fear. Anchoring scoring warps what you value. The Dunning-Kruger effect blinds you to what you don't know. Sunk costs trap you in what you should leave. Framing manipulates what you choose. In-group bias poisons who you trust. And fundamental attribution error corrupts how you judge every single person you meet. You don't notice any of them. That's the whole point. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.